Westfield Memorial Hospital provides high-quality health care to residents of Western New York, offering patients the most sophisticated medical advancements while keeping the ease and familiarity of a community hospital. Support for Chautauqua Sunrise has been provided by WRFA 107.9 FM, Jamestown's public radio station, streaming online 24/7 at WRFALP.com. Low power to the people. Meter's Restaurant, a family tradition for over 50 years in downtown Ripley, is a proud supporter of Chautauqua Sunrise. Meter's provides all-day dining, banquet services, and custom catering, specializing in pie. Funding for Chautauqua Sunrise is provided in part by the Chautauqua County Industrial Development Agency, with offices in Jamestown and Dunkirk, helping businesses to prosper throughout Chautauqua County. From supporting people with disabilities to enjoy great lives to providing health care services that are available to anyone, the Resource Center has been improving our county for more than 60 years. Learn more about how the Resource Center makes a positive difference in people's lives.
Is getting vaccinated on your to-do list? We can help you check it off because we make getting vaccinated easy. You've got this because we've got you. To learn more, visit yougotthis.usaging.org.
From the Access Chautauqua Studios in Mayville, it's Chautauqua Sunrise. Chautauqua Sunrise is hosted by Doc Hamels and supported by the award-winning volunteers at Access Chautauqua. We are here to share local news, colorful interviews, and events of interest to everyone. Chautauqua Sunrise is broadcast live Saturday mornings each week from 9 to 10 a.m. Send events via email or call us live. Check us out on YouTube and Facebook. And now, from the Access Chautauqua Studios, it's Chautauqua Sunrise.
Hello, everyone. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, and Happy Holidays to all of you. Today, we have a very special edition of Chautauqua Sunrise, and I've been announcing this throughout the last couple of weeks that this is a children's show or a family show. And I have put together a story, if you will, based on an experience I had with a young boy when I was superintendent of schools who came to my office one day. And from there, I spun this story, and it's part of a series of books that I'm writing called The Incredible Adventures of Marcus Finnegan. And we're going to be reading for you today and telling the story of Marcus's marvelous mission. So, kick back, get some hot chocolate, some cookies, whatever, and we hope you enjoy this as much as I did putting it together for you and the crew here today. Sometimes we need to write a story and leave the small details for our youngsters to create their own imagination. It's such the same way that the Amish mothers make their daughters dolls with no faces. This story was written with the intention to present broad strokes of possibilities and leaves the rest to the reader to finish. We just need to believe. Special thanks to my good friend Michael B., we'll just use initials, who told me of his plans to visit a friend who had moved. His conviction and creativity moved me to try and finish his story. Also to Evelyn D., who cheered me on chapter by chapter, telling me how she enjoyed the storyline as I was feverishly trying to finish this project by Christmas Eve 2008. That was 15 years ago. So I finished this on Christmas Eve, and this is the story of Marcus Finnegan, his marvelous mission. Chapter 1. I know what follows may seem hard to understand for most folks, but you have my absolute word of honor that what I report here in this manuscript is a true version of what was reported to me by one of my favorite students, Marcus Finnegan. I must confess early on that perhaps as his school's headmaster, that I may have encouraged him a bit into what the reader will find is one of the most incredible journeys that have ever been reported in print today, but more on this later. Marcus is a scrappy little fella who asks a lot of questions, tries out many of his ideas, and usually gets the job done. Not bad for a boy of 8. One day Marcus came to visit me, as he often did, to discuss how his summer had gone, and the fact that he was not happy at all about his best friend, Zechariah, having moved to California. Marcus and Zechariah had spent most of the summer visiting Marcus's grandmother's home down along the shores of Blue Lake. It was here that they had fished from early morning to supper time, pulling out little itty-bitty sunnies to respectable yellow perch. If the fish weren't biting, they still fished, but with an ingenious type of hook that Marcus had devised from an old coat hanger that he had fashioned in a way that could drag along the bottom of the lake. Marcus reported to me that not only had he added to his list of inventions, but that when he was old enough, he and Zechariah were going into business and sell his new hook for all the world to use. After all, how could someone retrieve a long-lost hat that may have been blown into the lake, or perhaps, if you were lucky, you could snag a gold cufflink from a sea captain's shirt that may have gone down with the ship during a horrible fight with pirates? As you can tell by now, Marcus was ingenious. As Marcus was in my office, I could detect that his eyes were a bit red and watery with his golden tan face from a long outdoor summer. "Mr. Finnegan, what brings you to my office today looking so glum?" Although I could call him Marcus, he likes it when adults address him in an adult manner. "Well, sir, I am a bit sad today because my bestest friend in the whole world, including of all the planets, is moving to California," said Marcus. "And would that be little mischief maker Zechariah Hinchley?" asking him, although I already knew headmasters usually know everything about their schools. "Yes, Zach and his family are moving next week because his dad got a really good job, and heck, you know what? They need the money. I am quite sure this would be good for Mr. Hinchley's family, that he will keep in touch with you, since I am sure that you have computers and such at home." I tried to be consoling, but I'm not sure I was successful. "It won't be the same, sir. Who will I talk to when I have a problem? Or who will I find pirate treasure with? Or who will go camping with me? Or..." Then he grew silent for a moment and gained his composure, because Marcus always wanted to be proper and not appear to be, as he would say, weak or willy-nilly. I pulled in a slow breath and pondered the matter before me. At times I wasn't sure I was talking to this elfin-like little chap or a small man with years of worldly experience. So not to talk to him as a child, but to appeal to his older side, I said, "Marcus, we all experience things as Mr. Hinchley leaving, and it'll be very hard to replace him, I'm sure. But if you would allow me, I would be most honored to be your new confidant if you have need in discussing anything until such time you and Mr. Hinchley are able to see each other again." This is where I have to take responsibility to some degree, because as you and I will learn, Marcus was more than what I thought capable of doing. So now begins the matter of Marcus's plan to rejoin his friend Zach, only to find himself in a, let's say, different situation. I was asked by Marcus to write a report, since He put it, "No one will believe what a boy my age has to say, but if you believe me, sir, they will believe you, headmaster." Believe me, I did and still do. And this is that report. I really don't recall the exact day that Marcus came to see me again, but I remember my secretary calling into my office and said there was a young student who said that he had to see the headmaster in no uncertain terms and that it was a matter of life and death. Immediately, I knew it was Marcus, since I told him at the conclusion of our last meeting that if he was ever troubled or needed to speak to his fill-in friend, that he should ask his teacher's permission to leave class if and only if his work was complete and in straight A condition, so that he could visit the headmaster for an important matter. "By all means, Mrs. McGillicuddy, send this troubled boy into my office straight away," I said without asking his name. Marcus almost glided into my office. He plunked himself down into one of my boardroom chairs with wheels. He liked this since he could move about the room as the wheels in his mind were turning, always turning. "Good morning, Mr. Finnegan, and what brings you in to see me today? It must be of unbelievable magnitude in order to convince your teacher, Miss Windfall, to release you to see me." "You are correct, sir. I have to talk to someone or I will burst," he blurted out. "Well, we can't have that." As I leaned forward and listened, with both interest and an eye on the clock, since I had a meeting coming up soon. "What seems to be on your mind?" I queried. "Remember you said I could come down anytime to see you as long as my teacher said okay and my work was done and I really needed to talk to someone like Zach and..." Running out of breath. "Slow down, Mr. Finnegan, before you pass out," I warned. Catching his breath and slowing down a bit, Marcus continued. "I've figured it out, and I can't wait for Christmas, sir." "Well, that's very nice, Mr. Finnegan. Most students at Rockcliffe look forward to Christmas as well, but it's only October. And what is it that you have figured out exactly?" "I'm going to visit Zechariah over Christmas," he triumphantly announced with a bit too much volume in his squeaky little voice. "I'm sure that you and your family will have a wonderful trip to California. Now, if that's all, I have a meeting in 10 minutes, and you need to get back to your studies. My family's not going with me, just me," Marcus said rather quietly, but with great confidence. This is where I put my pen down and put my telephone on Do Not Disturb, thinking this may take longer than the usual chat time that Marcus and I usually take part in. "Mr. Finnegan, did I understand you to say that you alone were going to California to see Mr. Hinchley?" "Yes, sir. You have it part right." Feeling comfortable that he could correct the headmaster's understanding of his announcement. Part right?" I asked with a certain adult humor. "What precisely do you mean by part right?" "It's so simple if my plan is right, sir. But first I have to ask you an important question." This is where the story really begins. And knowing headmaster thinks through an idea that begins a journey of a lifetime, I unknowingly did not know what was going to happen next. "The question, Mr. Finnegan, please. I only have so much time this morning before I have to go into my next meeting." As Marcus seemed to be looking somewhere else other than the rows of school law books and photos that cluttered my desk and office, Marcus turned to me with wide, deep eyes, with almost his mouth dancing and turned up at the corners, into a faraway smile that I've only witnessed upon this specific occasion. "Sir, I have a plan to visit Zach, but it involves someone other than my family." "Mr. Finnegan, I'm most concerned for your safety as I am for all our students at Rockcliffe. You can't be running off to California with a someone. Who is this someone? As I conjured up a stubbled beard truck driver or an oddball passerby that might promise to take a small child to see a childhood friend, only to find himself dropped off in another town, left stranded only to find the nearest police officer for help. Bad idea. Do you promise not to laugh or think my story is crazy? He pleaded in a voice that was so low I could hardly discern what he was saying. Well, of course, Mr. Finnegan. What you tell me will be regarded confidential in the best way possible. Please go on. While looking at the clock with only 8 minutes to my upcoming meeting, this someone is very well regarded by many, and I am sure that includes you, sir. Now I'm thinking that maybe he is talking of one of the school staff or perhaps a local minister. Oh, so you'll be traveling with one of your friends and their family then? Not exactly, sir. He's a friend of yours and mine, definitely. He travels, I guess, with one or two of his family members, Marcus explained with great assuredness. Mr. Finnegan, to the point, if you will. 7 minutes to go. Rockcliffe is north of California. Yes. So do you think that at Christmas, kids in California get their presents before the kids in Rockcliffe? Intrigued by this question, I slipped into my old teacher's style and went to an atlas on my wall that I kept just for these occasions. Little did I know that this was the next piece of Marcus's plan. As you can see, California is considerably south of Rockcliffe and farther from the North Pole. What was I saying? Therefore, it would be of my opinion, mind you, only mine, that since Rockcliffe is more north, that the children up here would get their presents first, and the children in California would get theirs later on, since I'm confident that would be the route that I would take if I was in charge of dropping off Christmas presents. To complete my scholarly thinking, I added, and furthermore, California is in a different time zone, allowing me 3 hours for extra delivery. Marcus's eyes seemed to widen even more, and I saw a definite twinkle that told me that he was somewhere else, plotting some wild adventure that only he could have conjured up by a boy of 8. Thank you, sir. You've answered my question. Please write me a pass. I have lots to do. I looked at him somewhat shocked and surprised that all he wanted was a short geography lesson. That's it, Mr. Finnegan? Yes, sir. May I go now? I reached for a pass and pen and indicated his name, time, and date, and was about to send him on his way when I realized I had answered his question, but he had not answered mine. Handing him his pass, I asked again, who is this someone that you plan to go to California with, Mr. Finnegan, to see Mr. Hinchley? He looked at me in a serious way that I could ever see him show. Sir, I know I can trust you, and I know you won't laugh at me, so I will tell you. But you must promise that you can't tell a single person. Mr. Finnegan, I will only promise if in my best opinion I am confident that you will be safe at all times I return. Sir, you're positive that you will agree to not tell anyone? As he moved close to me and whispered in my ear. As he left with his pass, I must admit I was relieved and quite amused by Marcus's plan. I was confident and comfortable that he would be safe and sound under his covers this coming Christmas Eve, waiting to open presents the next day. I was wrong. The days and weeks slipped by as October passed into November. Occasionally, I would see Marcus as I moved about the halls of Rockcliffe Elementary School. He would hardly look at me, but would slyly always give me a slight little thumbs up as he passed me. Not thinking too much about it, that I would read this as a friendly hello, and that's all it would be. I was not exactly right, though. In fact, pretty much wrong. Marcus was thinking, inventing, and planning more than he had ever before. Marcus was a kind of boy and was loved by his family and looked after his older sister Renee, who often would say, Marcus, Earth to Marcus, when she wanted to get his attention. Sometimes I think he's a miniature Albert Einstein, I could hear her say from time to time. And Einstein indeed. Marcus had the capacity to think he simply needed someone to help with his extravagant plan, but he had this covered too. It was December 23rd. I remember it clearly when Mrs. McGillicuddy once again buzzed into my office, and that there was a student who had to see me again in total panic. Who is it? I asked. You know that Michael the Marcus boy. Fine, Mrs. McGillicuddy, please send him in. Marcus came zooming in and sat in his favorite chair with wheels. He had a raft of papers, maps, and a calculator this time. His face was serious, and he appeared that he was preparing for a special class project. Mr. Finnegan, what brings you to see me just before our holiday vacation? Do you have your tree up and got all your presents for your family? Yes, sir. Everything is ready, but I need to ask you something. Oh, boy. Of course, Mr. Finnegan. What is it? Wondering to myself, how is it possible that only I could answer his question while 50 other able-minded adults circled him throughout the day? Sir, do you remember when I asked you to keep my secret? I did. Well, I have a little problem. I need to get the exact coordinates for Zach's house. Since I got into trouble at home for studying the effects of the aurora borealis on spaceflight too late the other night, I got grounded by my parents and I can't use my computer until after the new year, and that will be too late. Starting to wind up as he's been known to do. As you know, I can't use the computers at school since they are down for maintenance today, and the power is outage till Mondays because of the storm. Quite right, I noted. So could I use your computer since it's on its own line? Please, he asked with almost desperation. Luckily, on the last day before the holiday break, I had no meetings to attend, and I could attend to this young boy's inquiries. Remembering his plan to visit Zach over the break came rushing back into my memory. Mr. Finnegan, what exactly do you need the coordinates for? I don't suspect that you'll be driving, and last I knew, California didn't issue driver license to 8-year-olds. I said with a slight laugh. Sir, you are correct as always. I will not be driving, but I need to know exactly how to get to Zach's house. Now my eyebrows raised and lowered. Mr. Finnegan, you're confusing me once again. What is it that you mean to do? Sir, I told you I need to see my old friend Zach. I called him the other day and told him that I would be dropping by Christmas Eve, and if it was all right. And his answer? I was not sure I was encouraging him at this point. He said, "Great, Marky, old buddy. You will love it here. It's warm and sunny, and we go to the beach all the time, and my dad bought us a dune buggy, and..." I stopped him with a raised hand. All right, Mr. Finnegan. I suppose it can't hurt if we look up a map where Mr. Hinchley lives. We proceeded to input the address for a map service on the internet. If I didn't know better, Marcus would have done it by himself if I let him. 212 Palmcrest Lane, San Diego, California, Marcus recited slowly as I typed in the data. After what seemed a little bit to me and an eternity to Marcus, a map indicating the exact address that Marcus had asked for slowly scrolled downward. In an effort to contain his excitement, I hit the print button, and immediately my printer went to work printing a map for 212 Palmcrest Lane, San Diego, California, Marcus's intended imaginary destination. Unless he was taking a plane the next day, I was pretty confident that this work was all that of an overactive imagination of one of my brightest Rockcliffe students. And as I said before, I was wrong. Humor me, Mr. Finnegan. What exactly is the plan to get to California? I asked with certain growing interest. Well, do you remember what I whispered to you back in October? Yes, that's the plan. I knew this was going to be interesting, and I had the time, so here we go. When I was 3, I saw him just for a split second. I snuck down and saw him pointing down, and then I saw a flash. I can't remember much more because I think I fainted. Somehow I was back in my room, but I was on my floor. He somehow magically moved a pillow under my head just before I hit the floor. Had a great sleep and great dreams until I woke up. I know this is true. Do you believe me, sir? Mr. Finnegan, I believe you certainly, but let's be sure we are very clear. Who exactly are we speaking of? I grew quieter now and focused on Marcus's face to determine his sincerity. Gosh, sir, you must know who I'm talking about. I told you in October. Santa. Marcus had entrusted his secret and faith in me, and I would believe him and not make a joke about his experiences or his plans. It took quite a bit of self-control to not want to yell out, Santa, what are you talking about? But I didn't for one very good reason. Marcus's eyes were riveted to mine, and I knew that he was absolutely dead on serious. Well, Mr. Finnegan, you certainly have your work cut out for you. Can you give me a little idea of just how you plan to enlist Santa in getting you to California? Sure, it's actually quite simple. I've researched all of the internet sites on Santa's elves and all possible sightings that tell about his sack and the size of sleigh. I think that once he leaves our town of Rockcliffe, there will be plenty of room for me to slip into his sack, and he will never know it, he said very calmly. I see. And how do you suggest that you will be able to survive a round-the-world event without freezing or starving? I had to ask him something at this point. I've got that all figured out. I haven't grown much since last year, and my Arctic snow gear for when me and my dad go hunting fits just right. My sister will never miss her super warm gloves, and my boots are thermo-lined. As for eating, I saw on TV how you can buy those plastic bags and put things into them and use a vacuum to make them almost paper thin. Well, I've been saving some of my sandwiches, mostly the peanut butter and jelly, for the last 2 weeks, and a bunch of cookies. My mom has those bags like on TV, and when they went shopping, I stuck them in one of those bags and sucked the air right out of them. He proceeded to pull out of his backpack what looked like a space-age gravy in a small Ziploc bag. Watch, he said. He opened it, and to my astonishment, at least 3 sandwiches, 6 cookies, and some kind of indescribable food seemed to blow up just like food before my eyes. He handed me a sandwich, and I tried it. Not bad, I said with sort of a dazed look on my face. I've been testing this all week and decided that probably I would go with the sandwiches instead of pizza or spaghetti since they can make me a little woozy when I'm in the car. Didn't want to take any chances, in the sleigh, he explained. I did the same thing with chocolate milk and some of my mom's pie. I should have enough food to get to California in a couple of days while I'm there. I got some special pills for when I go fishing in case I get seasick for the sleigh ride too. Well, I guess you have all your bases covered, I commented. Do your parents know that you're planning this adventure with Santa Claus? No. I told my sister she wasn't too excited about me going, but she said she would cover for me until I got back, putting pillows in my bed and saying that I have a contagious disease and that no one should come into my room. I saw this in a movie once. I think it'll work just long enough for my trip. Just how do you plan to return to Rockcliffe? My curiosity getting the best of me. Well, that's the tricky part. I figure once I get to California, I'll jump out, surprise Santa, and I will say, whoa, where do you come from? And I will tell him how I planned everything. He's a super duper guy and grants wishes, and I think that he will give me a plane ticket back to Rockcliffe just in time for school to start again. I will call my parents and sister once I get there so they won't be worried. I can't wait to see Zach's face when I jump out from under the Christmas tree. Whew. The thought was remarkable for anyone to even consider hitchhiking a ride with the merry old elf himself and then somehow convince him to supply him oneself with an airplane ticket. I felt reasonably assured, although Marcus was focused on succeeding with his plan, that there was little or no chance that he could actually succeed. Therefore, I said, Mr. Finnegan, you are quite the ingenious young man. I watched you grow up and admired all of your entries in the science fair, including the time you made a rocket take off using rotten eggs. But don't you think this is pushing even your upper limits? What if you happen to miss Santa somehow? I wouldn't want you to be disappointed after all this work. Headmaster, sir, this is a great plan, and I suppose if it doesn't work, I will try again at Easter time. And when you know who comes sneaking into our houses, I'm not worried. I will just have to make different plans, Marcus said very confidently. I looked up, and time had slipped by during all this travel discussion. Whew! Well, Mr. Finnegan, is there anything else that I can do to assist you in rejoining your old chum, Mr. Hinchley? He nodded no. Safe travels, and do remember to write me a postcard from San Diego if you would. I handed him $1 to cover the card and postage. I generally don't give money to students, but in this case, I made an exception, and an exception it would be. From this point on, I must tell you that I am only reporting matters as was told to me by Marcus well after the fact. Although it seems hard to comprehend, I can only tell you that he knows it to be true, and I can't doubt his word. And now that I've seen the evidence, this now is his story. Marcus went home after visiting with the headmaster at Rockcliffe and began to make preparations for his cross the USA trip with the one and only Santa Claus himself. While putting various items into his backpack, he crossed things off his list that he had made weeks ago while getting ready for his all-important day. Once he was convinced that his backpack was ready, he went into the bathroom quietly, turned on the cold water, and slipped on his winter boots. Can't take any chances of getting wet feet, he thought to himself. He carefully slipped into the tub with 8 or 9 inches of water and stood with a stopwatch. He stood there like a statue for 5 minutes, observing his boots and wiggling his toes. Warm and dry. Should hold up just fine in case we land near any lakes on the way to California. Next, he put on his winter coat gloves while still wearing his boots. He found an old pair of safety goggles in his father's workbench and proceeded to turn a big fan on that his dad used for drying paint in his garage. Again, he took out his stopwatch and stood in front of the fan while it was turned on for hurricane speed. He had to bend his head into the pounding air while from the fan as he held onto his stopwatch. After 4 minutes, he couldn't take much more and ended the wind test. Phew! I better stay in Santa's sack for most of the time. If that sleigh is moving as fast as I think, it will take all my strength to hold on and stay warm. He wrote down the results of his test on his clipboard and noted 3 minutes in the wind, no more. For the rest of the day, Marcus joined his family and exhibited a certain holiday joy, and his parents hadn't seen this before. He was the first up the ladder to finish decorating the newly cut Christmas tree, and at one point he was almost hypnotized by a hanging glass ornament that contained Santa and his sleigh. Marcus marveled what it would feel like in just 30 hours from now. The countdown had begun. December 24th was a busy day in the Finnegan household. Marcus was up early and was holed up in his room doing Marconian things, as his sister would say. Mr. and Mrs. Finnegan were putting the final touches on the house decorations, and the family's dog, Meatball, an aptly named Pooch, who was as wide as he was tall, was running from one family member to another in an excited frenzy because of the sounds and smells that were emanating from all parts of the house as they had made ready for company, of course, for Christmas Day. He looked like a ball of fuzz with little beady eyes, always a tongue showing with a crooked canine smile. This happy little roll of fur was also Marcus's partner in crime when no one else was around to get into mischief with. This past summer, Meatball was Marcus's volunteer to go into space as Zach and Marcus experimented with what appeared to be a bike tire pump, a pressurized tube, and a lawn chair. Lucky for Meatball, the pressure that built up only catapulted him across the yard about 9 feet. When Meatball came to from the flight into space, he rolled over from his back and ran into the house under Marcus's bed. He stayed there for about a day and a half until the room stopped spinning. Marcus and Meatball were the best of buds, unless, of course, Zachariah Hinchley was around. Lately, though, Meatball had to find his own amusements since Marcus was locked away many nights in his bedroom. Around noon, Mrs. Finnegan called the kids together to go over last-minute details for Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. Mr. Finnegan, who loved the holidays, was dressed in his Santa hat and had been sipping on special eggnog all day. In fact, he was in one of what Marcus's mother would call a holiday mood. Santa Dad was out to the corner store to get a loaf of bread and some milk for lunch. Renee was busy chatting with her girlfriend on her never-to-be-seen-without cell phone. "Coming, Mom," she called from the second-floor bedroom. "Get Marcus, honey, will you, honey, so that we can talk and have lunch before it gets too late," Mom returned. Renee was pretty good at luring Marcus from most of his zany projects or his daydream world that most people found him in. So, as usual, she marched right up to the door, marked "Genius at Work," and tried the doorknob. Locked. "Marcus, Mom is serving your favorite pizza topped with double anchovies." Not necessarily true, but that was Renee's way of getting Marcus to come to the door. Stone silence. "Marcus," she said, "you can have it with chocolate milk and some of her chocolate walnut fudge. Come on, open the door." Stone silence again. "Meatball, are you there? Here, boy." As Renee puckered her lips trying to tantalize Meatball to come to Marcus's door. Double stone silence. "Mom!" Marcus is being a pain. He won't open the door and he's gagged the dog again, yelled Renee. Marcus, honey, please come on. We don't have a lot of time for your games right now. Please open the door and come on down for lunch. Mom pleaded with her sweetest Christmas allure. Doubled the double stone silence. Mom listened as close to the door as a mom can get. No computer whizzing or dog panting, no stirrings of feet or grunts that he would be right there. So Mom went to the towel cabinet and took out the emergency key and opened Marcus's door. She found all of his drawers open and his disarray. The floor looked like an explosion had taken place without the bang. Over across 3 mountains of boots and mismatched clothing, Renee spied a bright purple envelope which said, "Merry Christmas." Marcus was into eye-popping colors. Mom quickly grabbed the envelope and tore it open. Dear Mom and Dad, by the time you read this, it'll be too late. I have a special project that I'm trying out, and me and Meatball will be just fine. I will call you when I get there. Don't worry, we'll be fine. Merry Christmas. See you in the new year. Love, Marcus. P.S. Meatball loves you too. Renee craned her neck to look over her mother's arm to read and let out, "Oh no, he's going to ruin my Christmas again." Last year, Marcus had been experimenting with certain ideas of potions to try on his enemies like they do in Harry Potter. Renee tried one of his concoctions Christmas Eve while Marcus was taking his pre-Christmas shower. The rest of the story is that she was a very lovely Christmas green with red spots until almost New Year's Eve. Renee never blamed Marcus because she didn't really ask Marcus first. Marcus felt bad that she couldn't go out shopping after Christmas, but was happy to know that friend George Weasley potion for instant sickness worked just like at Hogwarts. Of course, he did sit in his room for 2 days without benefit of his new games, since his parents weren't quite as ecstatic about his success and let him know in more than one way. Sitting was not an option for a bit. Rereading the letter again, Moms immediately ran throughout the house looking for any sign of Marcus or Meatball. She then called Marcus's dad using a voice speed dial that would have been quite difficult to measure. And this is what she says. "Marcus, Meatball, gone. Avoid, don't know where they are. What are you going to do? Wait till they get..." And she just, she said so fast. "What?" implored Dad on the other end. Marcus has run away from home and taken the dog. Sobbed Mom. She broke down into a river of tears. Renee stood next to her with her hands on her hips and took the phone from her mother. "Dad, he's going to ruin my Christmas again. This isn't fair." "Slow down. I'll be right there. I'm just turning up our street." Red costume and all came barreling through the Finnegan's front door. Okay. Start from the beginning, will you? I could hardly understand what in the world you were saying on the phone," Dad barked. Oblivious to his parents' concern and sister's self-interests, Marcus bundled up with a backpack and checking his watch to make sure his timing was good. He allowed himself enough time to make his way to the best location to make his interception. He was in quite an upbeat mood and was thinking about a million different pleasantries when he heard a weak little woof coming from behind him. He did a half turn and didn't see anything and kept walking along a rather quiet country road. It was starting to snow now, pretty hard, and he couldn't see too far down the road. He thought returned to what seemed like a slideshow of photos of him in his mind, Zach running after a football or jumping into a pool. The only difference was that he would be in the warmth, the sunshine of California, and he was in deep thought. No deep snow and red tipped running nose for him this Christmas. He was off to be with his bestest friend in the whole world. His little heart actually seemed to hurt a bit when he thought about how much he missed Zach. At the same time, his heart would race when he thought about what Zach's face would look like when he knocked on the door and yelled, "Merry Christmas, old buddy!" or he jumped out from under the Christmas tree. He could hardly wait. Woof! A little louder this time. Woof! Lots of snow, and then what appeared to be a moving snow pile. Marcus could just make out the little beady eyes of his old pooch, Meatball. How in the world did he get here? At the last minute, he decided to leave Meatball behind because he thought the trip would be too much for him. The Christmas note said that the dog was going with him, but he figured his parents would figure things out later. He thought he had given Meatball a slip when he slipped out of his bedroom window. Marcus didn't know that when Dad had gone to the grocery store and that he had left the door to the garage just the slightest ajar, and of course Meatball never passed up the opportunity to make a wild dash, or whatever he considered a dash, into the wild, wide open world outside of the house to rummage for some tasty garbage, or perhaps chase a cat. Both of which were always safe, since the old canine could hardly move and get up on his back legs, and cats were, well, generally safe, since his tummy just cleared the ground. His garbage-eating, cat-chasing days were more or less a legend in his own mind. Marcus growled at Meatball. "Go home! You're not supposed to be here. I know that we talked about coming, but this is going to be more than you can handle, old boy." Meatball, not exactly high in the gene pool when it comes to understanding commands, jumped up and down half inch and was delighted to see his boy master. What adventures would they have today if he only knew? After several attempts to persuade and coerce Meatball to return, Marcus finally gave up and said, "I want the record to show that I tried and that you came along according to your own free will." From there, he gave the pooch a big hug, actually a bit glad to have a travel companion. He explained what he planned to do and what they were headed towards and where they were going. Meatball looked about the same as usual, simply glad to be with Marcus, and kind of smiled with his tongue off to the side and his eyes sparkling. So began the trip that neither of the two companions would ever forget. "Just how many friends does Marcus have?" cried Mom to her husband as she frantically searched for her school directory. "Well, I know there are I know Dylan Howard and Ginger Sampson he hangs with. Zach is California, and then there's Malachi over on Pine Avenue. Give me part of the list and I'll start calling with my cell phone." And so it went on for over an hour. Some calls finding parents at home, others giving silly messages of holiday cheer that they would, call the caller right back on their machines. No Marcus, and no one had seen him since school was out for the holiday recess. "Let's not react too soon," Dad said. "Knowing Marcus, he will be trucking in here right about supper time and give us one of his out-of-the-world stories. If he's not here by 7, I'll call Pete James down at the sheriff's office and see what they suggest we do. Let's go back up to his room and see if there's anything that will give us a clue as to what he's up to. When I get my hands on him, he's going to wish..." He caught himself between anger and fear, and tears welled up in his eyes, and he looked away so that the girls didn't see him worry. That might only make things worse. He also thought, this isn't like Marcus. What's he doing? I hope we find him really soon. Being Christmas Eve didn't help either. Renee went up to her room and continued calling her friends and telling them what a lame thing her brother had done, which really meant, "Have you seen him? And if you would you call me right away?" But it wasn't cool to say that, and she had to say it like in kid code. The room was a disaster. It was a mess to start with, but Mom had pulled it apart even more when she was trying to get Marcus to lunch. That seemed like days ago, not hours. It was now about 4 o'clock. Slowly they picked up each item from the floor and on top of the dresser and treated each with a renewed reverence and respect. If they had not, they did now. The item might just reveal its secret. Unfortunately, nothing was talking, even if it could. Although almost exasperated and definitely frustrated, Dad just plopped on the bed, closed his eyes for a minute, trying to feel the room and the last thoughts that Marcus had before all of this happened. He sensed urgency, but organization. He knew his son pretty well. Going fishing or camping was always one of his favorite father-son activities. Dad enjoyed the outdoors, but Marcus was always thinking about crossing a bear with an elephant or hooking up a camera to a trout to look for sunken treasure in the lake. Creative mind in that one. He thought quietly to himself. Opening his eyes, he spotted a map on the ceiling above the bunk beds. Faintly, even ghostly, he could see a line on the map. At each end, he thought he could make out a X. It was finally getting dark. December was like that. Marcus pulled out a peanut butter, jelly, and banana sandwich. Had to keep up his strength for the trip. Meatball drooled and sat back trying to beg. It was sort of hard to tell when he was sitting or standing, since the distance to the ground was infinitesimally small. Marcus was generous with all his friends, and this included Meatball. He hadn't planned on 2 in the end, but he felt that he could get along on part of the 10 sandwiches and granola bars that he had packed. Mind you, the other 9 didn't have bananas in them. Figured that they would turn brown from the cold and turn mushy. Nevertheless, Marcus sparingly gave Meatball a fourth of their first sandwich. He took the bananas out, well knowing that Meatball was partial to cheese rather than fruit. Besides, if he ate fruit, he wouldn't be the little roly-poly beastie that moved at the speed of a snail. Meatball approvingly licked Marcus's face after this little feast and curled up to take one of his 13 daily naps. Marcus had a small portion of his sandwich. It wasn't much, since he wasn't very hungry. And it was that he was so excited and his mind was working 100 miles an hour, thinking of all the things that he would need to do between now and knocking on Zach's door. So his appetite has sort of gone away. The 2 traveling companions were carefully snuggled in the air vent, which was connected to the downtown post office building. The warm air was flowing through and kept the 2 mates warm and toasty until their expected driver should appear. The way I see it, Meatball, is Santa will have to stop here to pick up all the last-minute North Pole mail before he stops at our houses. You know how kids are these days, always changing their minds, and I'm positive that Renee sent him at least 3 letters changing the color of the iPad that she wants. So when he goes for the mail, you and I will slip into the big old sack, and then we will be quiet until we get to California. I figure 8 hours from now we'll be in California. I have this special scope that I made so I can take a peek out of the sack and figure out when it's time to slip out of Zach's house. Meatball sort of looked up at him cross-eyed, trying to figure out what Marcus was talking about. He didn't have a particularly fast brain either, so he figured Marcus was talking about lunch, and he wagged his bent little tail and dozed off again. The one thing that Marcus prided himself on was his ability to work with technology. Today was no exception. He had an earpiece so that he could listen to the local weather reports. He had his cell phone on vibrate so that if he got a call, it wouldn't tip Santa off, and his alarm was set for midnight just in case he fell asleep. His phone was vibrating a lot, but never answered it. was probably his sister wanting to know where he put her CDs of her latest heartthrob. "Why won't he answer his phone?" demanded Marcus's mother. "That's because he's impossible," yelled Renee down from the stairs. "He never leaves home without it. He must have not wanted us to find him, that little turkey." "Renee, Marie Finnegan, that will be enough from you," demanded Mrs. Finnegan. "This isn't a game. He could be in grave danger somewhere, and who knows, maybe in another city by now." Mrs. Finnegan just broke down in tears, and her husband put his arm around her to console her. "We both know, dear, that Marcus is a very independent young man. Don't think the worst. We need to stay positive." Renee makes a good point. This sounds like one of Marcus's schemes. Remember the time he brought home the 23 dogs in order to save their lives from the dog catcher? He was out for hours until we found him carting home the mangy sheepdog. I'm confident he will be blown through that door any minute with some cockamamie story about what he was up to today. Mr. Finnegan tried to calm his wife even more, but deep inside this was even a little out of the ordinary, and he had a strange lump in his throat when he tried to swallow. Mrs. Finnegan seemed a little better now, so she slowly went past the dining room that contained all the Christmas cookies that she had ready for the next day's family dinner and made her way to the living room. There sat three of Marcus's closest friends and fellow schemers. Renee had called Malachi's sister Sarah and told her about Marcus. Telling Sarah anything was like putting a story on the 6 o'clock news. The word got out about Marcus, and Ginger, Malachi, and Dylan made a beeline to the Finnegan house as they had so many times before when they would get together on Saturday mornings and decide what mystery of the world they would try to figure out that day. Ginger, with her light red hair, Marcus's only friend of the girls' persuasion, piped up and suggested that someone contact the headmaster of the school, since she and the others had seen Marcus coming and going from there one day with a map in his hands. Mrs. Finnegan's heart raced with the suggestion, and she slipped back into her, "Oh, that Marcus, I just want to hug him, and at the same time I want to give him what's for," pulling out another one of his capers. A voice on the other end of the phone line was that of the headmaster of Rockcliffe School, who calmly announced that he was not available to speak at the moment and would return one's call as expeditiously as he could upon his return. Marcus often marveled at the way his headmaster talked, although he didn't always understand these train-long words, as he awed and would try to pronounce them when others weren't around. Mr. Finnegan closed his cell phone and plopped on the stuffed chair which squawked as he sat down, only to find Meatball's favorite toy, a rubber chicken, snugly pushed between the cushions. Everyone turned as Mr. Finnegan jumped up and turned rosy, red-faced. "One of these days, that dog and I are going to fight. How many times do I have to tell Meatball, keep that chicken in his own bed," he complained. Just when Marcus's friends didn't know whether to laugh or explode at the sight of Mr. Finnegan, his cell phone came alive with jingle bells. "Hello? Yes, this is Mr. Finnegan." "Headmaster! Thank you so much for calling." "I see. Well, thank you for calling on the commercial break, since you were watching the Christmas Carol. Yes, we have our tree up, but could I? No, I don't favor duck over good roast beef. You see, well, I'm glad you have your gifts all wrapped. Could you just please? Headmaster, stop! Marcus is missing." Mr. Finnegan finally was able to blurt out, "Oh, dear," said the headmaster quietly. "He hasn't been home all day, and we're getting into late in the evening. Are there any activities at school that Marcus may have gone to that we don't know about? Asked Mr. Finnegan. I'm afraid not. Did Marcus leave a note or suggest that he may be going anywhere in the last few days? Responded the schoolmaster. No, we have checked with everyone, including his friends Ginger, Malachi, and Dylan. His backpack, cell phone, and some of his other stuff are gone. Can you help us out here at all? Implored Marcus's father. There was a pause. After what seemed an eternity of silence on the other end of the phone, then the headmaster firmly asked for Dylan to come to the phone. Mr. Finnegan wrinkled his forehead and shrugged his shoulders at the request and called Dylan to the phone. Dylan, come here. The headmaster wants to talk to you, snapped Mr. Finnegan. Me? I didn't do anything. I don't know anything. I'm innocent, squawked Dylan as he waddled over slowly to the phone and looked as if he was magically turning into it was turning into a viperous snake. Barely cradling the phone to his head as if it was about to be yelled at, Dylan nervously said, Hello? Dylan, this is your headmaster. I demand that you tell the truth and do not leave a single detail out. Do you understand? Commanded the headmaster in his most stern voice. Yes, sir, whispered Dylan. Did Marcus talk to you about his friend Zachary? Questioned the headmaster in a little kinder voice. Yes, sir. We all did since he was part of our group at school, Dylan reported, feeling a little less anxious about things now and was realizing that he wasn't going to detention. The red from his chubby face was returning to its normal color, and his glasses were less foggy from perspiration. Did he talk about visiting Zechariah soon? Well, you know Marcus, he's always saying, Dylan, answer the question at hand, the headmaster almost roared. The red returned, and Dylan plopped on the couch as he felt like a blast just pushed past him from the phone. Yes, he eked out in the smallest of voices. The rest of the folks in the room had their eyes fixed on Dylan, trying to figure out the part of the conversation that they couldn't hear and why Dylan had just kicked up into the air 2 months' worth of dust, a couple of cheese balls from the couch cushions. Thank you, Dylan. Now, in your best estimate, do you deem it possible that Marcus has been putting together a plan to visit Zachary in California? Asked the headmaster, a little more coolly and feeling badly that he had barked at Dylan in such a manner. This was perhaps an emergency, and sometimes he did get a bit sharp in these situations. He would have to make it up to Dylan with some special allowance at school. Dylan put his fleshy hand to his chin and thought for a moment. He did ask me for my father's AAA map of the United States and my Boy Scout compass, but I thought he was working on a geography lesson for Mrs. Thompson. And Dylan! Oh, yeah, right. Well, at lunch the other day when they were serving my favorite triple cheese pizza, Dylan! Sorry, Marcus was really excited and was mumbling something to himself, sort of like check or got it or We thought he was just being Marcus. Do you think that Marcus went somewhere, sir? Hey, wait a minute. He did stop and buy a jar of peanut butter at the store on the way home the other day. Does that help? Dylan blurted out, hoping to be in his headmaster's good graces again. Thank you, Dylan. You have been very helpful. Please put Mr. Finnegan on the phone again, asked the headmaster employed for him. Headmaster, Marcus isn't here. You told me. Dylan, not Marcus. Marcus's father, and be quick about it. He was losing patience with this one. Dylan quickly handed the phone to the older Mr. Finnegan and moved as quickly as he could to the other side of the room next to Malachi and Ginger, hoping there would be no more questions for him tonight. Meatball and him had a lot in common when it came to moving. Yes, headmaster. "I think I know what Marcus is up to," said the headmaster slowly and thoughtfully as the wheels slowly turned in his mind, trying to recall all his conversations with Marcus before Christmas. The headmaster proceeded to tell Mr. Finnegan what Marcus had told him and stopped only to sip some tea to moisten his vocal cords. Mr. Finnegan sat in shock, along with a certain half grin on his face, both amazement and relief all in one look. "What?" cried his wife. "Where's Marcus?" she demanded. "Off to see Zachary in California, I think," said the older Finnegan. The room might as well have been a bank vault, since not a sound or breath could be heard from anyone when these words were said. Everyone knew that it was true that Marcus was up to something. Marcus checked the time on his blue-lit digital watch and saw that it was now 11:14. His heart raced, and he knew it was now time to go to the next step of his plan. He was pretty confident with the plan overall and decided that he would wing things as he went along if things didn't go quite the way he thought. Meatball kind of burped and looked up at Marcus as his master moved slowly through the air vent and opened the screen into the mail room of the post office with his Cub Scout pocket knife. With a couple of twists of the knife on each of the 4 screws, the traveler and his waddling, hairy companion were into the dimly lit room that contained at least 50 canvas-covered sorting bags. Marcus grabbed some packing tape and reattached the screen back onto the vent so that no one or no thing would consider coming in right then. He would come back later on and reset the screws. With his little flashlight that he had received last Christmas for reading in bed, Marcus searched the whitish tan baskets for the one which would be heading for the North Pole. After about 7 minutes, he found a small room near the back of the building, near the loading dock. The room had a little window, and Marcus hopped onto a chair to take a peek. Ha! Just where I thought it would be. Ready to go for quick delivery for those last-minute letters. He got down from the chair in a flash and went to open the door, but it was locked. "Oh, no," he thought. "Marcus, be cool. What would Santa do to protect this delivery?" Marcus often talked to himself, and it served to help him out of other tight situations. Meanwhile, Meatball was in full chase of some shadow, perhaps a cat. Even though his bark wasn't very loud, Marcus scolded the dog, "Shh," commanded him, "back to the locked door. You can't be running off like that, or you won't be going with me when Santa comes along." Meatball sort of looked at Marcus with a blank look. "You know, Saint Nick." Nothing from the dog. "Father Christmas?" Meatball rolled over and played dead. "Not now. Not about..." "All right. How about, ever hear of Kris Kringle?" Just then he heard a little click by the doorknob. Of course. A password. Kris Kringle had been the magical words that had been placed by somebody on the lock. Marcus grabbed the doorknob and then at once talked his way into success and walked into the room. He and Meatball moved quickly and quietly into the room and closed the door behind him. Who would have thought? A password, a secret word, Kris Kringle. Without any pause or thought in his mind, he lifted Meatball into the air, and the pooch was now squished between a large box and several tan envelopes, all marked North Pole Express Delivery. Marcus hopped in carefully, not to damage the contents, and pulled the canvas basket over their heads. Firmly in place and ready for the next step of his plan, Marcus made himself comfortable while waiting. The seconds seemed to move extremely slowly, and the minutes were almost torture to poor Marcus. Meatball, on the other hand, had somehow rolled on his back again, and his stubby little legs were sticking straight up as he gave off his little snore, as he always did when he slept. It was getting quite warm in the basket, and Marcus was not used to being up so late. The last time he checked, it was 11:29, and then everything went black. Later, he would recall some commotion in the distance and feeling the basket being emptied into something soft and velvety with sort of a hot chocolate bayberry smell all around him. "Hello, Mary? This is Bart Finnegan." "Hello, Mary. Can you hear me?" "Happy holidays. You have reached the Hinchley family. We can't come to the phone right now, but please leave a message and we will get back to you soon. Thank you so much for calling. Merry Christmas from Mary, Mac, Rosie, and Zach. Oh yes, and Brutus, our cat. Beep, beep." "Hello, Mary. This is Bart Finnegan, Marcus' mom. Can you please call us as soon as you get this message? We think that somehow Marcus is trying to get to your house out there in California, and we need to know what Zach knows. Thanks. Oh yeah, and my phone number is code 717-225-8909. Thank you. Beep." Mary looked at her husband, Renee, Marcus' 3 friends, and a representative of the local police. She just dissolved into tears and said, "I don't know who else to contact. Where can he be?" Malachi got a little watery in the eyes and went over to Mrs. Finnegan and quietly told her that he was sure that Marcus would be fine and that he would be home soon, just like all the times they had gone on their adventures. Mrs. Finnegan gave him a little smile, and through her swollen eyes, red nose, and chapped lips, Ginger motioned to Malachi to come back and sit down with her and Dylan. "Do your parents know that you're here? We don't want another family to be worrying about their child as well." Dylan announced that his father was coming over any minute and would be taking them all to midnight services at the local church. Just as he said that, the last in church, the doorbell rang, and a clone of Dylan stood in the door, except he was 2 feet taller and just as white. "Good evening. Have you heard from Marcus yet?" he politely inquired. Mr. Finnegan went over to him and gave him an update, and Dylan's father rounded up the threesome, and off they went. The police officer was getting a bit edgy and told Marcus's parents that he would be more useful looking for Marcus for now than he would be just sitting there, and he checked back with them in a half hour. It was now 11:45, almost Christmas, and no Marcus. Marcus awoke from a very deep sleep, and he seemed to think he could hear a low whirring sound and blue light all around him. Little did he know that he was being scanned by the latest multi-digital 15-gig letter reader that was ever built by man. Then there was a hush, and Marcus could hear some feet scuffling on his left side. By now, Meatball was awake and looking like he needed to walk outside. Of course, this would amount to about 3 feet out the front door, but he could visit the closest maple tree if he could. Now a squeaky voice announced, "Who's in there? And state your business." Marcus was still waking up and responded that he was trying to get to California for Christmas, and that if he had done something wrong or needed to pay for his passage, he would either make things right or pay the necessary fare. Meatball, thinking that it was his turn, let out a gurgle of barks, since he was sort of upside down and his snout was poking into a package. "Sounds like trouble. Could be a thief with a killer attack dog," came a voice now from the right. The voice wasn't quite as squeaky, but had almost an impatient growl in it. It's been a while since we had this kind of trouble. Get my gun and my billy bat. Can't take any chances. Let the boss know what's going on and call security. Nothing in this sack we can't handle. Marcus hadn't been worried up till now. Now he's felt his heart racing and tried to find a way to see what was going on outside the sack-like prison that he had made. And his hairy friend, they were both stuck in here. Carefully, he moved his hands along the sides of the canvas, eventually found the smallest of holes. Perfect. He thought as he pulled out his latest self-built scope, he placed what looked like a thin pink straw with a mirror through the hole. Slowly, he moved the mirror around until he stopped almost absolutely still. There, looking back at him in the mirror, was an eye, and it was getting larger by the second. Just as Dylan, Ginger, Malachi, and Dylan's big twin were leaving, the headmaster, Rockcliffe, came rushing up the walk. The door was still open a bit as the individuals passed each other with a little more than a nod. The headmaster was tall and lanky with bushy eyebrows and a prominent hooked nose. He wore his hair longish, but in a youthful way, more like from the Revolutionary War without the ribbon. He wore a flat, snapped-down hat and a large plaid scarf, and it seemed to engulf his upper body. "Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Finnegan. I felt that I should be here and wait vigil with you until young Marcus returns." Mr. and Mrs. Finnegan stared at the figure who had replaced the others. They didn't know what to say, and other than to offer him some coffee, and when he declined, he asked if they might have some Earl Grey tea. Mrs. Finnegan went directly to the kitchen in search of some guy's tea. The headmaster took advantage of the moment now that Mr. Finnegan and he were alone. Renee had retreated to her bedroom and decided to go online and chat with her friends. "What news have you?" Mr. Finnegan gave him the morsels of information that had been picked up while the headmaster was en route to their house, which wasn't much. They had learned that Marcus had polished off the larger portion of a loaf of bread, and it appeared that he may have taken some bottled water and a banana. His flashlight and backpack were missing as well. Just then, Mr. Finnegan just remembered that he hadn't seen his sad-looking canine all evening and had forgotten Marcus's note. He instinctively began to call out, "Meatball! Meatball! You little roly-poly, I got a treat for you!" He waited a moment and then recited the invitation again. "Oh my gosh, I forgot that he took Meatball with him," he announced. "And what, may I ask, is a meatball?" queried the headmaster. "Oh, yeah, he's our family dog, sort of a cross of bag of hair, twigs for legs, and a balloon for a body. We call him Meatball because, well, he's round and sort of looks like one, I guess." The headmaster just stared at this explanation and now understood why Marcus liked to be alone and create things in his room. Marcus pulled back his scope, closed his eyes, and grit his teeth. For some reason, this was a signal for Meatball to lick his face. It took all of Marcus's power not to yell or push his slobbering partner away. Just then, the entire sack in which he found the two of them in seemed to move upward and then sideways. More voices. Then he heard it. He was sure of it. He heard the most beautiful sound in the world. It began low and built louder and louder until it was a distinctive ho, ho, ho! Marcus knew that he had arrived. He was with Santa, and he was sure of it. Mrs. Finnegan, after a few minutes with a bit of blush, and said that she couldn't find Mr. Gray's tea, but would Mr. Limpton be all right? The headmaster took a moment to consider the proposal and gently laughed to himself and graciously accepted the hot tea. "You know, Marcus is quite the young man. He and I have spent many hours in my office since he was in kindergarten talking about so many things. He is old for his age. I wish I had his spirit and sense of adventure. Unfortunately, I never dreamed that he would actually undertake hitchhiking his way to California via Old St. Nick. I mean, this is sheer brilliance. The odds are against him, but still brilliance. Somehow, Mr. Finnegan didn't share the moment with the headmaster and mumbled something under his breath that would have been nice if the headmaster would have alerted them to Marcus's scheme some time ago. But then he thought that no one in their right mind would have called a student's parents and honestly believe that the story that had been told. It was now almost midnight, and Mrs. Finnegan was exhausted. She called everyone, talked till she could hardly ask another question. She had cried a river of tears in worry for her son. Nothing more to do for the moment. Mr. Finnegan and the headmaster sat and talked about things. Nothing really important, just talk like two old friends, wishing and against the odds that something awful had overcome Marcus. I'm confident that our fine police department will bring him home soon. Don't you worry, the headmaster spoke gently. Eventually, they ran out of things to talk about, and the sound of the clock over the mantel making and marking time was all they could hear. Both men had dozed off to sleep, not realizing that Marcus was having the adventure of a lifetime. By now, Marcus had been freed from his sack, and Meatball was running around a large room filled with leaping flames from a fireplace and warm lights which seemed to float overhead. Well, Marcus, what can I do for you? Appears that you've taken great maneuvering to be here tonight. Do you know where you are? Asked the bearded gentleman, wearing what looked like a knit sweater with snowflakes on it and a bib overalls. Well, sir, I believe that I'm at the North Pole. What I would like is your help to get to my friend's house for Christmas, because I really miss him, and nobody will probably miss me at my home. He couldn't believe he just said what he said. It was pretty much true. He was always told that he was in the way, go to his room, go on and invent something. His sister practically didn't even know that he existed sometimes. As for his parents, they were always busy with something and never seemed to listen to him all the time. He asked his mother if he could blow up the car the other day to see if she was even listening, and she told him, yes, dear, that would be nice, and try not to wake the neighbors. She wasn't listening. The bearded man seemed to know his thoughts, and he was going through all these memories. Then he said, California, no can do. Marcus looked at him totally puzzled. What do you mean, no can do, sir? He asked politely. Already been there. Time to kick back and get some rest. It's been a busy night for some of us. Sir, what time is it? Well, at your house right now, it's exactly 4 a.m, was the answer. How is that possible? Marcus asked himself. I didn't think that I was asleep that long. You were. Most folks don't realize that I can travel in ways that no one else can. What do you mean, sir? Marcus responded back with eyes widening. I'm sure that you figured out who I am by now. Most people have me being born a few hundred years ago, but I'm actually older than that. But I don't look a day over 400, do I? He chortled and let out another series of ho-ho-hos. When I was a boy not much older than you, I had a playmate named Arthur. My father was in charge of horses and other livestock at Arthur's home. It was actually a castle. Anyways, his father was very kind to me and let me and Arthur spend time together. One of Arthur's teachers was a wizard named Merlin. Ever hear of him? Marcus nodded in the affirmative. By now his eyes were as wide as they could be, and he never noticed Meatball licking his hand. Meatball had dinner on his mind. Well, Arthur was my very best friend until we were about 17. He wanted to go to battle, and I was not cut out for that sort of thing. Merlin always kidded me about being soft and that I was always worried too much about the poor and their children. Arthur would go off to war, and I stayed behind carving little toys for the children of the men who went off with Arthur. As time went by, Arthur's army grew too enormous in proportions, and I could hardly keep up with my carving for all the children. In a moment of bewilderment, Merlin heard me say, "I wish that I could do more things better for all the children of the world who were needy and lonely. I hated war and the sadness that it brought to families." One day, I was carving in the horse barn, and Merlin asked me if I was serious about my wish. I said that I was. He said that he would grant me my wish, but I would have to leave Arthur's castle because there Arthur wouldn't be patient with someone who worried about women and children. He said that I would have to go away to the north where no one would find me, and so that I could do my carving and other good deeds in peace and privacy. I was torn about leaving my oldest and dearest friend, but my desire to help others won the day. Merlin granted my wish through some ancient magic spells. He not only created a workplace for me in the North County, but he gave me the gift of what he called parallel time travel. In other words, while you were taking one breath, I can be slipping in and out of hundreds of homes, leaving special gifts for deserving children. Given a full night's time, I can cover a lot of houses, let me tell you. Marcus was usually ready and able to carry on a full conversation with anyone. But this time, he sat speechless, and the wheels in his head were spinning out of control. Was he really there? Was he seeing, hearing all of this? Was he asleep in his bed back home dreaming all of this? Marcus began to focus on the room more. He could see past the bearded host, and there behind him were folks about his size staring at him. There were about 6 or 7 hiding, almost little bunnies, scared of a dog approaching. Beyond them there was the oversized chair. Marcus could see what looked like a cozy cabin with a large table decorated with Christmassy kinds of statues and shiny round things. It was hard to see since most of the light came from the fireplace. One of the child-sized figures motioned to Marcus to come to the doorway that sort of looked like a porthole of a ship. Marcus got up from his seat and without hesitation or fear went to look where this elf-like creature was pointing. Marcus could see out what looked like the inside of the largest building that he'd ever seen. There were conveyor lines and belts and gears and pulleys and switches and all sorts of buttons. This must have been the toy workshop, but nothing was going on right now. Must be done for this year, he said to himself. He tried to go through the door, but he got a firm shake of the head, "No," from the host. Somewhere along the way, though, Meatball was escorted to the door, and Marcus could hear him barking outside. His eyes grew wide once more as he saw his very own dog chasing reindeer. He couldn't tell, but just as Meatball got close to one, it looked like it sort of lifted him right off the ground and landed a few feet from the pooch. Meatball was having a grand time until what looked like a polar bear came bounding by and gave poor Meatball a swat and rolled him right down a little hill. The bear stood on his back legs and seemed to make a half growl, half laughing noise. Meatball thought this was something and ran right up and bounced off the bear's belly. The bear stared at this alien-looking critter and swatted him again. This time, Meatball rolled right up to the front door. He was happy and but all out of breath. This playing and running had worn him out. Just then, out of nowhere came a soft, almost angelic voice. "You must be hungry. Would you like something to eat or drink?" Looking back over his shoulder, there stood the warmest set of eyes and the softest smile he had ever seen. A woman who looked to be in her 80s offered Marcus some sandwiches. They were far better than his peanut and butter sandwiches that he had brought along for the trip. She then offered Meatball a bowl of nice, cool water and handed Marcus just the right temperature mug of hot chocolate. The bearded fellow piled the sandwiches high on his plate and refilled his mug. His eyes seemed to dance with a funny little wrinkle along their sides. This wasn't like the kind of hot chocolate that you mix with hot water. It was sort of dreamy chocolate that made you want to go Marcus pondered as he slipped off to a warm winter's night slumber. Mr. Finnegan and the headmaster both awoke from their catnaps with a whoosh of wind and banging from what seemed like that came over their heads. They both looked at their watches, and each had noted the time was now 4:27 a.m. A grunting sound was heard from under a dark green velvety blanket. Mr. Finnegan slowly approached it, since the blanket was not familiar. From under one corner, two alien-looking eyes peered out. Mr. Finnegan grabbed the fireplace poker and carefully lifted the corner of the material, which seemed to have snowflakes embroidered on it in gold. All at once a creature leaped out, or at least tried to leap on the floor, and rub up against Mr. Finnegan's leg, with its stubby little tail wagging. "It was Meatball! Where did you come from?" cried Mr. Finnegan. The headmaster just stared at the silly sight of this fat little dog trying to jump, but it couldn't. Mrs. Finnegan was awake now and came running down the stairs, hoping that there was word of her son. She too stared at Meatball and what he was doing, this little dance and running around in circles, and he was performing for an audience. "Is Marcus here?" Mrs. Finnegan cried, with her heart ready to burst with hope beyond hope. She had been so worried about her little boy, and now she would maybe have him back. "What's all the commotion about?" came a little voice from under the green blanket. The far corner of the velvety material flipped over, and a wild-haired boy with big, black, wide eyes looked about confused. Before he had a chance to say another word, his parents were hugging and crying all over him. The headmaster gave a great sigh of relief and sat down while pulling out his hanky to dry his eyes. Marcus was home and safe. What a child! After a proper reunion, Marcus sat back, curled up on the couch near the fire, and retold his parents and headmaster as many of the details as he could remember from the past 12 hours. The adults looked at each other for a while. They were trying hard to believe him and process what he was saying. It was a bit too much, but they decided to let it go for now. The mantel clock chimed, and it was now almost breakfast time, and Christmas had come. On the corner of the mantel, near one little reindeer figure, was a small envelope that was addressed to all who are listening to Marcus. Mrs. Finnegan had begun to tidy the living room up and noticed the gold flecks that were reflecting from the paper. She picked up the envelope and brought it to the others. "I guess this is for all of us," she said sheepishly. She opened it as her husband and the headmaster moved closer. Marcus was drowsy now and a bit sad. He hadn't made it to Zach's. Meatball was curled up next to Marcus. It had been quite an experience for him, too. Mrs. Finnegan lifted the contents of the envelope to the light and read but one word, which was written in gold. Believe. Nothing else. No signature. Just one golden word. Believe. The adults looked at the blanket, and then at the card, and then to Marcus. Oh my gosh. He almost made it, said Marcus's father. The smell of bacon was filling the house, and soon the aroma of coffee was swirling around that. Mrs. Finnegan was humming like she had never hummed before. This was going to be the best Christmas morning ever. Although they were pretty tired, Mr. Finnegan and the headmaster assisted in setting the table and arranging the chairs for the morning feast. Marcus was snoring away, and Meatball was totally unconscious. Just as Mrs. Finnegan was about to pour the first pancake and yell for Renee to come down, the doorbell rang. It was now about 7 a.m., and they were expecting no one. Mr. Finnegan went to see who was calling on them so early, especially on Christmas morn. Can you imagine who was at the door? Low voices could be heard from the front foyer. Then they got louder, and laughter was very apparent. A young boy came streaming into the living room and jumped on top of poor sleeping Marcus. "I must be seeing things again," yelled Marcus. "It's Zach! When did you get here? I was trying to get to your house, but it didn't work out so well." "Well, we got a package in the mail the other day, and it had tickets for the whole family to come to Rockcliffe. So Mom and Dad said, let's go, and we'll take our presents with us. And here we are. I really missed you, Marcus." The boys talked nonstop about Marcus's failed adventure, and Zach told him all about California. "What the heck is going on down there?" came a sleepy voice from Renee. She walked down the stairs like a zombie, and her eyes opened wide to see the strange collection of Hinchleys, her headmaster, her parents, Meatball, and her geeky little brother. She strolled coolly into the living room and looked about and surveyed the presents. She looked at Zach and almost had a half-human grin on her face, and then turned to scold her brother for almost ruining her Christmas. The rest of the day resulted in the headmaster staying for dinner, presents being opened, and joyous music playing from their stereo unit. The Hinchleys left to see their family members in town, but agreed to leave Zach for a while. It was a great day, and it passed much like any other Christmas in most homes. Marcus went to bed that night still wondering about it all, was just too tired to figure things out now. It all could wait till the morning. Well, I told you, everyone, this would be almost unbelievable, didn't I? Marcus was so brave, not too well planned, but fortunately received some help from some caring individuals. Marcus came to see me one day after the Christmas recess and told me many of the particulars that you have read up till now. I suppose that we should never doubt the determination of a child. This goes for one's sisters or brother as well. The part that even Marcus doesn't know, that Renee had come to see me just prior to Marcus's great adventure and told me how worried she was about her little brother. What, you demand? She didn't even like her brother. She was rude to him and referred to him as a nerd from time to time, you may report. All true. But even behind those silly gestures lives a warm and caring love for her brother. When Renee had visited me at my office just before the holiday recess, she asked me if I believed in Santa Claus. I asked her why, and she told me she couldn't think of anyone else to ask for help. She wanted to find a way for Marcus not to be so sad. I told her to write it all down in a letter to the jolly old elf. She protested that it was too late. I assured her as long as she got it written, addressed to the North Pole and to the post office before Christmas Day, she had a fighting chance. Must be she made it. The letter went something like this. December 24th. Dear Mr. Santa Claus, my brother has been feeling really bad this year about his friend Zach Hinchley moving to California. I know that I pick on him sometimes, but I really do care about him a lot. I really don't need anything special this year, so could you figure a way to help Marcus out instead? I know this is last minute, and I'll understand if you can't. Yours truly, Renee Finnegan. P.S. I can't remember for sure, but thank you for the Hollywood Barbie doll that you brought me 3 years ago. But don't tell my friends, but I still play with it sometimes. Yes, Renee, I do believe. And so ends the marvelous mission of Marcus Finnegan. I hope that perhaps we'll have more stories of this little fellow in the future. Merry Christmas, everyone, and I hope you enjoyed this story. Take care.